It's interesting to me that we talk about millennials like we're not actually here. So if you are between the ages of 18 and 35, would you please stand? Yay! Those are my people. I have one more year. I'm so excited about that, right? No, but it's interesting how we talk about populations as if they're not in the room. So you can insert millennial, person of color, people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered. You can insert all these things, and we often talk about stuff like it's not right in front of us. And we as a church are very good at doing that, and yet we wonder why people don't connect with us, because we always create an us and a them. So my background is in sociology, and I very much value research and understand the importance of categorizing and making generalizations because it provides a framework, and we need a framework to understand the work that is before us and who we are. So I say that all tongue-in-cheek, but to say that we have to be careful about our language. We have to be careful about who we're talking about, and if we're treating people more as objects than as subjects or as people that we are seeking to be in relationship with for the purpose of being in relationship with them. Not for anything else, but because Jesus and God are relational in their very being, and so we seek out relationships because that's who we are. Can I get an amen? I was told that you all don't actually talk back to others that have been here before, but you have already proven them wrong. So if I say God is good all the time, there you go. There you go. So I call myself a bit of a unicorn, and I find myself in a very interesting situation today because people that literally were at the beginning of my journey in ministry 14 years ago are here in this room, and that does not happen. So we have the Reverend Louise Johnson, who I have not actually said hello to, who is now the president of Wartburg Seminary, who I met when she had graduated seminary and was visiting camps across the U.S. I am a alumni of Luther Hill Ministries in LaGrange, Texas, worked there for 3 summers. But Louise was coming through my first summer there at 19 when I was just a little know-it-all girl from the city of Houston working at camp. And she said to me one day, "You're going to be a pastor." And I said, "I don't know you. Get behind me, Satan. What are you talking about?" And that was 17 years ago. 17 years ago. And then when I started seminary at the Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia, guess who was there as the director of admissions? So I've got Louise Johnson here. There's Paul Hill. Where did Paul go? Y'all moved us around, and that totally discombobulated me. I don't like to be moved. Paul, I got to meet when I was 21 years old, after I'd failed out of college and gone through a major depressive episode, and my synod and my church family came around me and offered me work. And then they said, "You need to go to certification school at Wartburg Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa." And I don't even know how to spell Dubuque. Now I do. Then I didn't. And so I go to this place, and I meet this man named Paul, and he is excited. He looks the same like he did all those years ago, has not changed. And I get to be with him for this 3-week, that's when they did the 3-week certification school in Dubuque. And part of graduating that was doing a high ropes course. Anyone who knows anything about me knows that I do not like not being in control. And Paul said, "You have to do at least one element to get this certification." The other thing that people know about me is I don't like being told what I can and cannot do. So here I am on the giant swing screaming this whole time, but I got my certification, sure did, and he's here all those years later. And then I think about my dear friend David Box. Is he still here? Where is he? So David and I worked at camp together when we were young kids, and we've talked about our story, but I just say briefly, and I won't do the whole crying, snotty bit now, but we talked about our story as being a black Puerto Rican chick from Houston, Texas, him being a white boy from Brenham, Texas, where the KKK was still active, and we find ourselves working at camp together for 3 weeks, back to back to back. And I'm like, "Lord, why did you put me with this boy?" And then fast forward, our lives have totally changed. He's working at a camp, and he does anti-racism training with his staff every summer. He is just an amazing friend. And so I'm here, literally today, with people that formed and shaped me for who God has called me to be in ministry. So I just have to give all praise and honor to God, as well as saying that my father is here. So my parents don't get to travel with me often. I travel a lot, and I've decided to bring them along on some occasions recently. So my dad is here. And when I first discerned a call to ministry, this would have been those same 14 years ago, My father said, I would never sit under a woman pastor. That's not in my belief system. I would not do that. And about a month ago, my dad says, I can see you as my pastor. So when we talk about amazing grace, when we talk about the goodness of God, when we talk about the way that God can transform things, I have seen it in my life. I know it to be true. So I just say all of that by way of a little introduction. And now I ask you this question. What is wrong with death? This conference is called Change or Die. And I've been trying to wrap my head around what is wrong with death. I was a palliative care chaplain for a year and a half with Emory Center for Pastoral Services in Atlanta, Georgia. My role was to walk with people as they died. And I went into that position thinking one thing about death, actually being literally afraid of it and afraid of dead bodies. And I happened to work in a hospital where the chaplain did everything at the time of death. So actually escorted the body to the morgue, released the body from the morgue, was with the family signing the paperwork. So I got very comfortable not only with death, but the dead. And I kept thinking to myself, why are we so afraid of death? And as I was preparing for my unprepared remarks for today and thinking about the name of this conference, I was like, I thought we were a resurrection people. So I often say, I am not afraid of the Lutheran Church dying. I say I'm a bit of a unicorn because I'm a third-generation Black Puerto Rican Lutheran who grew up in Black Lutheran churches. We don't exist. It's a rare, rare breed. But I'm here to tell you that actually we do exist, that there are some of us in this church. And the question that I get asked on many of my visits to congregations is, when did you become Lutheran? And that hides a lot of things, doesn't it? Right? Like, why am I Lutheran as a Black woman? When did I become a part of this church? And then I go through my whole history. Was I baptized in the church? And when did your family become Lutheran? All of these things. So I love this church. This church is my church. And I see that we are struggling, and we are struggling with this dis-ease called fear, because we don't want to die to ways of being that actually are not proving very useful right now. So you're not maybe going to like what I have to say. So Brenda, I apologize right now. But as Kay shared, I believe in hope. So I don't put my faith in the Lutheran Church in any of its expressions that are represented here today, which I think is just a beautiful sight to behold. But I put my faith in the kingdom of God through the person of Jesus Christ, who came to walk with us and to talk with us and to show what it meant to be a person of faith living in this world. And you know what? That's what millennials want. We are so in our heads trying to figure out how to get people back to church. I'm telling you right now, they will not be coming back to your churches. They won't. But that's not anything to despair, because that gives you the opportunity to go to where they are, if we're using the they and us and them language, to go to where people are and to listen and to learn and to walk with and to engage in a relationship that's mutual and reciprocal. For so often the church has come in many people's lives and said, we have the answer. Like, we literally say that. The way, the truth, and the life. Like, we say we have the answer. And all the research that Kay has done and that has come before the work that was just presented shows that it's very difficult to have that way of thinking at a time when people are saying there are many answers. But here's the thing that I know to be true. And I don't say this about a lot of things, because the older I get, the less I can actually say this is true definitively. Like, that list is growing small. I used to be like, I know this, and now I don't know anything. The only thing that I know is that God is love. That's the only thing that I know to be true. And that God, for me, showed up in the person of Jesus Christ. And so I can't help but talk about that love in my life. I can't help but talk about how God has moved and transformed and changed me in a way that then invites other people to consider, well, what is that thing in your life that has breathed life into you? What is the name that you call it? How is it nurtured? How does it help you deepen in your understanding of self and in your role in this world? Do you know people are asking, like desperately seeking, what does it mean to make a difference? Why do I matter? What am I here for? These are all questions that actually we can help people answer. But we are too busy being afraid of death that everything that we do is in service of us continuing to live a life that is no longer relevant. That's hard to hear. I'm sorry, I just said that. It's hard. Sometimes I hear stuff come out of my mouth and I'm like, oh, there's my job. I can't, right? That was the spirit. That was all this, I don't know. But like, we are so caught up in keeping things as they were. The other thing I hear all the time is, I just wish it was like it was back in the heyday. And I'm like, well, which heyday? Because there's a time it wasn't so good for me, looking like I look, or being a woman in ministry, or name your thing, right? So we have a perspective that what was the heyday or the prime for me was the heyday or prime for everyone else. And the question now is, what time are we in today that God is calling us to be in? So there are 4 things that I do in my work. And my work is actually kind of laughable because I am charged with doing young adult ministry in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So basically getting young adults back in church where they're not going to be in the first place to begin with. That's my job. That's what they pay me to do. So what has happened is, over my almost 3 years in this position, I've changed how I think about this work. It is not about getting young adults connected to church. It's about getting young adults connected with who God has created them to be. It's about helping them articulate their faith. It's about helping them walk in service of justice in the world. And it's about helping them claim an identity that says you are first and foremost a child of God before anything else that this consumeristic society would tell you that you are. That is my job. Now, I'd love to get you connected with a congregation. I'd love for you to be a part of a worshiping community, but I actually can't do that. That's y'all's job. That's the people on the ground's job. So I can do my part, and then some of you will do that. Some of you will have young adults who engage your congregations. Other of you won't. So it becomes a question of, where are those places and spaces of energy that you can help resource, that you can help connect with? How is your church being of service to a particular community that right now is desperately seeking to be connected and to belong and to actually have a space that they can be who they are? So as everyone was talking today, I was taking notes and was tweeting, and the ambient, what was the phrase? Where's Kate? Ambient awareness. There was a whole conversation happening on Twitter with the millennials as you were doing your presentation. We're very good at that, by the way. But there are a couple of things that I kept thinking about from the presentations today. You all have everything that you need to engage millennials if that's what you want to do. I often say that people don't change because they don't want to. My father and I had a conversation, and we were talking about, well, when you know better, you do better. And I was like, Daddy, that's not true. Because I know that I need to eat and work out to be healthy. I know that. I don't do it, but I know it. We know as a society what we need to do to end hunger, but we don't do it. You can talk about all the things that we know to be true, but we don't do any different. We keep doing the things that we're doing because we don't want things to change, if we're honest. Because with change, we've already talked about, comes death. And death brings about grief. And grief brings about all of the nostalgia and the way that things were and the things that held deep meaning for us. So I don't want to belittle any of that. I know that all of that is important, hugely important. But again, we are people that believe in the resurrection. Death does not have the final word. So from the 5 presentations, not counting Kay's, the 5 prior to her, there were 5 points that stuck out to me that I think about was said, but then also can apply in your work, whether it's engaging millennials or just people in general, right? Like, this is not, I often say that I get to talk about millennials and young adults, but we're just people. Like, I pay bills, I'm grown. Like, if I have young in front of my title, you have old in front of yours. So Steve said, God is awesome. Like, God is awesome. And for me, that means tell the story. We often talk about evangelism, and I say you can't send people out to do evangelism if they can't articulate how God has acted in their life. How are you going to go out and tell someone about Jesus when you can't even say Jesus' name? Or when you can't talk about goodness and mercy or suffering and pain, but then you want me to come into your church and lay my soul bare, and you haven't done that. So if we want to do that, we have to actually walk the talk. And I think this is true for any relationship that we're in. We can't send people out to evangelize if they can't talk about the story, if they can't say God is awesome and say it unapologetically and tell you why God is awesome. And all of us have stories of that. All of our lives have meaning and they matter, and we've seen experiences of the Spirit moving in our lives. So we all have that. So I say discipleship actually precedes evangelism. I have young adults who work in the church-wide organization, and part of my role is to do work with them in human resources and to think about how it is millennials are welcomed into the workplace. I honestly think the whole millennials thing is because boomers are really scared, because we're usurping your numbers. Because, like, the amount of time and energy y'all spend studying us is really laughable. But I'm like, okay, I'll go along with it. I can be a company chick. It's fun. But I've had young adults come to me and say, so I'm a member of this Lutheran congregation, and, like, it's a congregation that's reminiscent of my childhood, but I feel like I have to confess. And I'm like, well, what's going on? And they're like, so I'm going to a Bible study at a non-denominational church. And I'm like, what's wrong with that? Praise Jesus. But I just feel like I'm cheating on my church. And I'm like, what are we doing? A, that we're not offering Bible study, not book study. I mean Bible study. That people are seeking out faith practices and ways of being in community that we don't even offer. And B, why are people feeling ashamed that they're going to another part of the kingdom to actually get fed? So I just leave that out there. I don't know. It just came to me. So the second thing, know the context. Brenda, where's Brenda? Is she still here? Brenda, as you were talking, I kept thinking about the importance of knowing one's context, right? So you have all of these stats about giving and wealth and assets and just being very clear and aware of the context that you're in. I don't know if you know it, but this country is not going to be white, majority white, much longer. And I say that because I can't talk about context and not talk about issues of race and class, because it's who I embody it. Right, I can't show up someplace to talk, even if it's offensive, because it's who I am, so you see it on me. So we are in a time and place where we have to know our context. And knowing the context means the people that had the assets, this wealth, right, that was passed down, which we could talk about how they got it later, but the wealth that was passed down is not going to be the same as it was in the future. And so how are folks who look like me, who may not have the same historical wealth, but do have a desire to give and be generous and charitable, being welcomed to the table? How is it that we're thinking about the context that we're placed in? And again, I know y'all are in a slightly different place. I was in Waukesha, not Waukesha, Waukesha last year. And I went into a coffee shop. And I was running late, because I'm always running late. And I was getting my cup of coffee, and I opened the door, and everyone went, psh. And no one was mean. Like, everyone was friendly. But I was like, there are places in this country that are still all white. Like that, I've lived in Philly, Atlanta, Houston, Chicago. I spend a lot of time in the West Coast in the Bay Area. And that's just not the reality for other parts of the country. So I have to also, like, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. Like, I'm aware of your context, but I'm just telling you it's coming. It's coming. So the third thing I thought about was, where's Tom? You were preaching. Like, seriously, my dad was like, I need to come to his church. I can tell, right, that you have a heart for God. I don't know anything about you, but I can tell that you have a heart for God, and more importantly, for God's people. And the thing that kept coming to me was actually the West African tradition of Sankofa. So there's an Akan word from the country of Ghana. It's called Sankofa, but it means to go back and get it. Basically, to reach back to get what you forgot. And whenever you talked about Jesus, I kept thinking, this is what we're called to reach back, because we've forgotten it. It's as simple as that. We have professionalized ministry to the point that we are more concerned about our business structure than we are about being prophetic and changing the world. I'm generalizing. I know you all are good people. I don't want anyone to feel guilty or get mad. But as churches, it comes down to the fact that we have built ourselves a business model that is not sustainable. So we've got to go back and go back and fetch that which is most important, which is Jesus. 4, Aaron, this compelling reason. So I did a community organizing training a couple years ago. And Jean, where's Jean? One of my colleagues, she was there. And Raimi, is Raimi still here? Raimi was there. Like, it was one of the most life-changing things I've ever done. And it talked about self-interest, right, and clarifying self-interest. And I kept thinking about that as you were talking about the compelling reason. Why do I want young adults in my church? Why do I want people of color in my church? Why do I want insert the category in my church? What is my self-interest? And how do I become clear about that? Because whatever group you're targeting is going to know what your intentions are based on how you target them. So not only do you have to be clear and have the compelling reason, also for me known as self-interest, about why it is you're doing what you're doing, but you have to know what's in their self-interest. Why would someone come to your church? There used to be this myth that young adults were all at home on Twitter on Sundays, like they weren't at your church, they were on Facebook. And then when I was working as a chaplain, when I would have Sundays off, it was like the first time I wasn't in a congregation working, so like I would actually like sleep in and then like go to brunch. That's where everybody is, like people like at brunch. And then I'd go to IKEA, people are there. Like, it's not like people are at home by themselves. No, people are in community. I have a brunch date on Sunday with 4 of my closest friends in Chicago because we all happen to be on the same continent for a 1-week span of time, and we're going to brunch. We're not going to church. I just confessed something. We're going to brunch because these are my sisters in ministry. We pray together. We connect deeply. All of us travel so much to the churches that we do belong to, don't know if we're members or visiting anyway. But I get to be with them breaking bread, imbibing the blood, we'll call it that, and connecting in ways that my soul desperately needs. So I think about, again, this self-interest. What's in the self-interest of the people that you're trying to engage? And the only way you find that out is through conversation and relationship, which again takes time. 5th, the whole notion of unleashing generosity. I didn't write down their name. Is it Tim and Dan? Oh, go girl. Unleashing generosity and this notion of it being a culture and a movement. The number one call that I get is, do you have a program, resource, or curriculum for young adult ministry? And I say no, but if you want to talk, like I'd be happy to learn more about your context, know your context. I'd be happy to sit down with you if I need to come visit because you pay me to do that. Like, that's my job. And to walk with you. No, we don't want that. We just want a program. I can't help you then. I can't help you because young adults, 18 to 35 is huge. An 18-year-old and a 35-year-old are not going to necessarily be in the same place. I don't know who the young adults are in your context. Maybe you don't even have young adults in your church, but there's a community college or something near you. I wouldn't know all that. I can't just give you something to make something happen. Of the people that call, I don't know percentages, a small portion actually take me up on that offer. Everyone else is like, okay, no thank you. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't really want to change. And that's fine because you're clear in your self-interest. You don't necessarily have that compelling reason. So I think about the God is awesome, being connected to telling the story, the knowing your context, being connected to recognizing also your privilege in the midst of that. The way that you also think about your context is to think about the privilege that you have in that. And someone said earlier, was it with the great power comes great responsibility, back to Spider-Man? Like, y'all were like, what's Spidey? Come on now. So great power and responsibility. Sankofa, go back to basics. Jesus, plain and simple, compelling reason, clarifying your self-interest, and unleashing generosity, recognizing that this is about a culture and a movement. Life is never going to be the same, not only because of the numbers and the reality, and people are literally dying off, that's what happens, but also because we've never had the rate of change happen as quickly as it's had at any other point in history. How many of you have a smartphone? How many of you had a smartphone 10 years ago? They actually didn't really exist like that. So think about what's happened in the last 10 years. And it's only gonna quicken, right? And I don't say all this from a standpoint of despair. I actually don't. Because young adults and folks of faith around this country and around the world are doing some amazing things. You talk about social entrepreneurship, thinking about business models that actually meet needs, but that also are faith-based. That's huge. People are gathering together. They're doing dinner churches. They're doing homes. They're gathering together in communities like that. I don't know that the next iteration of the church, and we're approaching the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, so I am not actually surprised that it's time for things to change. We've been doing this way for a long time. But I'm not going to be surprised if we all end up being out of a job. Not out of our vocation, but out of our jobs. Because the world is changing. So I would just say, get ready, don't fear death, and God is with you. Last thing before I leave, because it's that time. My favorite text is from the prophet Isaiah. And I heard one of my favorite scholars, preachers, black womanist theologians ever speak a few years ago. And then 2 years ago, I got to literally meet her and was on a program with her and was totally having a fangirl moment. And she is the Reverend Dr. Renita Weems. She is the first African American to get her PhD in the Hebrew Bible. And I often say, if you are a pastor and you only use white theologians to prepare for your sermons, then there's a problem. So I would say look her up. But she talked about this whole notion of being prophetic, how prophetic has become kind of this buzzword. And she had this sermon, and it was entitled, "So You Want to Be a Prophet?" ? And I keep thinking about the chant and the rhythm of her sermon, because so many people have been calling me prophetic recently, and I'm like, y'all, it doesn't turn out well for prophets. It doesn't. They're alone, they're crazy, they're in the wilderness, they ain't got nobody to love them, it's just them and God, and they don't like God, and God don't like that. It's just a lot. So I'm not trying to be prophetic. But then I talk about how anything that's prophetic stands the test of time. So you can listen to it, read it, watch it, and it can be applicable to everything that's happening today. So in Isaiah 58, you see, this is 3rd Isaiah, and we see like the restoration and the promise kind of coming to life for the people of Israel. And there is this whole section that's labeled in the NIV text and other texts as true worship or true fasting, true and false worship. And it's this notion of what is it that God not only requires, but is seeking from his beloved children, from the people of Israel. And it goes on to say, chapter 58, verses 6, I'm getting older as well, and my Bible is getting smaller. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter when you see the naked to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and God will say, "Here am I." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. God will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. This is my call. I'm very clear of that. And I just ask that as you leave this place, as you engage in conversation, as you enter into the place that you serve and think about ministry, how is it that you are challenging not only the people in your context, but yourself to think about the whole as the body of Christ, to think about the whole as bringing about restoration and healing, and to think about the one who went before us, that will be after us, that our hope resides in. And maybe it won't be change or die. Maybe it will be change, die, live again. Thank you.